What if the voice in your head, the thoughts that feel so personal, were never truly yours? What if, long before you spoke your first word, or made your first choice, someone else's story was already woven into your mind, shaping who you would become, and punishing who you might have been? Your mind, before it became your own, belonged to her, not by force, not out of cruelty, but through a subtle, unyielding power. When you were a child, you weren't just loved, you were molded. Every glance filled with disappointment, every fleeting smile of approval, every silent moment when you cried, became a code you learned to obey, not because you were weak, but because survival demanded. Carl Jung didn't call this abuse. He called it unconscious inheritance. It's the pain, the fears, the unmet needs of your mother that seep into you, not through words, but through presence. You never got to choose this legacy. You simply became it. And now, you call those thoughts your own, that relentless inner voice, you call it me. But what if the reason you feel trapped, anxious, or lost is because the life you're living was written for someone else's story? What if you're not broken, but programmed? And what if the first step toward healing isn't learning something new, but unlearning what was never truly yours? You don't remember when this happened, because you weren't meant to. Before you formed memories, your mind had already been inscribed, not by choice, but by proximity. Children don't learn through logic, they absorb what's around them. Before you understood words, you felt emotions. You learned what was safe to show, and what would cost you love. If she was anxious, you learned to scan every corner for threat. If she was distant, you learned to perform, to become invisible. If she was controlling, you learned to shrink and disappear. And if she was hurting, you learned to heal her, not because you wanted to, but because your survival depended on. Jung called this the mother archetype, a universal psychic blueprint, the most powerful emotional force shaping a child's inner world. But he didn't describe her as just a person. He saw her as a field of influence, a presence quietly molding your emotional landscape through thousands of unseen moments. Here's the frightening truth. The child doesn't realize this is happening. You didn't know that guilt could be learned, that shame could be inherited, or that fear could become your inner compass all before you could even spell your own name. Because she loved you, you trusted her. And because you trusted her, you never questioned the code she embedded in you. You assumed it was truth. So when you learned to be quiet, to sit still, to please others, to say sorry before you were even sure why, you believed it was maturity. But it was fear, pure, unfiltered fear. Fear that to be seen as you are would mean rejection, abandonment, or worse. Fear that your real self was unsafe, unloved, unwanted. Fear that the only way to be worthy was to hide the parts of you that didn't fit her expectation. And so you learned to perform, to survive within her invisible script. Now the real work begins. What if healing means dismantling that code? What if freedom comes from waking up and realizing that the voice in your head, the relentless critic or the harsh judge, is just an echo of a story that was never yours to tell? You don't have to carry her pain anymore. You can start to rewrite the script, not by fighting the past, but by seeing it clearly for the first time. Healing is learning to listen to yourself beneath the noise, to find your own voice beneath the echoes. It's not easy. It's uncomfortable. It means sitting with the parts of you that were silenced, that were trained to hide, and learning how to let them speak. But in that struggle, you begin to reclaim your mind, your heart, your life, because the person you are beneath, all the inherited pain, all the unconscious programming, is waiting to be discovered. And that person, raw, real, imperfect, is who you were always meant to become. The fear of rejection, the dread of losing her attention, the terror of losing her love, these shaped you long before you understood them. You became hyper-aware, learning to read her silence as a warning sign. You edited every word before it escaped your lips. You smiled through the hurt. You said it's okay when it clearly wasn't. All of this happened before you made a single conscious choice. Now, as an adult, you wonder why saying no fills you with guilt, why simple texts become riddles to decode, why your body reacts before your mind can catch up. It's because you weren't just raised, you were programmed. You inherited her emotional DNA, not through genes alone, but through countless moments, tones, glances, and the crushing weight of her unspoken expectations. She didn't need to punish you outright. Her withdrawal was punishment enough, and you, desperate to hold on to love, became exactly what she needed you to be. This wasn't parenting, it was encoding, an invisible blueprint that you're still building your life upon, whether you realize it or not. She didn't teach you how to think freely, she taught you what to fear, and that fear still rules you. You fear disappointing others. You fear being misunderstood. You fear being truly seen, because as a child, being seen often meant being correct. So now, you wear masks. You overperform. You bury your own needs to make others comfortable. And all of this endless dance started before you even had a name for it. That's the power of maternal imprinting. The invisible blueprint, not born of cruelty but of survival. Because she too was molded by blueprints she never got to rewrite. But what happens when you finally see it? When you realize your entire sense of self was crafted to survive her emotional storm. That's when unlearning begins. And in that unlearning, you start to breathe, truly breathe for the very first time. A child will do anything to keep love, even if it means vanishing, piece by piece. Not suddenly, but slowly, over time. It starts in small moments. You cry, and she looks away. You express anger, and she tightens. You ask questions, and she sighs. You learn that some parts of you are allowed, and others are forbidden. So you hide the forbidden part. You don't stop feeling, you just bury the feelings deep. You don't stop needing, you just silence the needs. You don't stop existing, you fracture. And the fragment that survives is the version you show the world. That mask you wear is the version that endured. Carl Jung called this mask the persona, the socially acceptable face you present to avoid pain, gain approval, and stay safe in her gaze. But here's what Jung understood, and most people don't: the persona is not who you truly are. It's a disguise, a survival suit, a carefully constructed imitation of the person you had to become. Behind that mask lives something deeper, something raw and real, your true self. But it's hidden, afraid, unsure if it's safe to come out. Because all your life, survival meant hiding it, folding it away, pretending it didn't matter. That true self is still inside you, waiting to be found beneath layers of learned fear and conditioned silence. It's the part of you that wants to speak without editing, to show up without armor, to love without fear of abandonment. Unlearning the blueprint means giving yourself permission to feel what you were taught to ignore, to express the needs you silenced, to let your soul breathe in spaces where it once suffocated. It means embracing the parts of yourself that were deemed unacceptable, and discovering their strength. You might feel lost in this process, unsteady, vulnerable, exposed. But this is the path back to yourself. The journey from programmed survival to authentic living. The slow dismantling of inherited fear to reclaim your own voice. You don't have to stay trapped in her silence or dance endlessly to her tune. You can step out of the blueprint and begin writing your own story. The story of the self that's always been waiting beneath the mask, the fear, and the pain. Because real freedom isn't about escaping your past, it's about understanding how it shaped you, then choosing to build something new, something honest, something real. And when you do that, you start to see the world and yourself with fresh eyes. Not through the lens of fear, but through the clarity of truth. What Jung called the shadow, the parts of yourself you've pushed away, denied, or locked deep inside. Your anger, your wildness, your rebellion, your voice all silenced, to make space for a version of you that wouldn't upset. Because as a child, love wasn't unconditional. It came with rules, moods, unspoken contract. And without realizing it, you agreed to them. You became the pleaser, always saying yes, always apologizing first. You became the fixer, constantly watching for what was wrong, trying to make it right. You became the perfect child, high-achieving, self-sacrificing, quietly drowning in silence. Every time you stepped into one of these roles, you moved further from who you truly were. These weren't your true personality. They were survival tools, masks, cages. You laughed when you wanted to scream. You smiled while breaking inside. You gave support when you were the one who needed it most, and people praised you for it. They called you mature, well-behaved, responsible. But what they were really applauding was your disappearance. Here's the painful truth. No one sees the child who hides perfectly, and over time, the act becomes real. You forget it's a mask. You forget there's a real self underneath. You become what others expect and lose sight of what you need. And somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispers, "This isn't me. This has never been me." But you silence it because that voice, your real voice, has always come with a price. Even now, as an adult, you hesitate to speak your truth. You weigh your worth by the standards others set. You carry guilt simply for existing as yourself, because when love was conditional, being authentic became dangerous. So you split yourself in two. One part lives in the light, pleasing, adapting, surviving. The other part retreats underground, reject, unseen, suffocating. But no division lasts forever. Eventually, the hidden self leaks out in anxiety, anger, addiction, depression. And you ask, why? Why do I feel like I'm constantly performing? Why do I feel empty, fake, disconnected? The answer is that you're still living as the child who had to survive, not as the free adult who's allowed to be real. That child survived by becoming what she needed, not who she was. Now, it's time to ask, who are you? When survival is no longer necessary. The longer you wear the mask, the further you drift from your true self. But that buried self hasn't disappeared. It's waiting for the moment you say, "I don't want to be loved for the mask I wear. I want to be seen, even if it means being misunderstood. I want to be whole, even if it means standing alone. I want to be real, even if it costs me everything I built for safety, because safety is not freedom. And if you're ready to be free, you have to face that shadow. You have to meet the parts of yourself you've long denied. The anger that feels dangerous, the wildness that seems untamable, the voice that's been silent too long. Only by embracing these parts can you step into your true power, because freedom isn't about pleasing others. It's about accepting yourself fully, the light and the dark. It's about living honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about breaking the cycle of survival, and finally, choosing to thrive. So stop running from the parts you think are unacceptable. They are the key to your wholeness. They carry your strength, your passion, your truth. When you bring them out of the shadows, you reclaim your voice, you rewrite your story. You become who you were always meant to be, not a mask, but your raw, beautiful self. And that is the bravest thing you can do. The part of you left behind to survive the child you buried deep inside did not disappear. They simply went underground. And what hides in the dark doesn't stay quiet forever. This is where Jung's idea of the shadow begins, not as evil or darkness, but as rejection. Every time you silenced a feeling just to be loved, every time you abandoned your own needs to keep the peace, every time you became who she wanted instead of who you really were, you chipped away a piece of yourself and locked it away. At first it felt like a fair exchange. Love for silence, safety for sacrifice, but nothing buried stays hidden forever. The anger you weren't allowed to show turns into passive aggression. The needs you were told were too much become addiction. The voice you couldn't use turns into anxiety, tension, dissociation, and worst of all, you blame yourself. You wonder why you're too sensitive, too intense, too needy, too ashamed, too angry, too exhausted. But what you're really feeling is the return of everything you had to deny. That is the shadow. The longer you suppress it, the louder it knocks at your door. The shadow doesn't vanish when ignored. It waits, growing heavier, learning your pattern, and then it begins to act through them. Suddenly you sabotage relationship, push people away, attract chaos, avoid peace, fear intimacy, and crave validation from those who remind you of. You tell yourself you're broken, but you're not. You're haunted by the part of you that never got a chance to live. Don't upset. Be who she loved. Be good. Be small. Don't be too much. These voices sound like your own thoughts, but they're not. They are echoes of programming scripts written by fear. Here's what Jung warned us. What you resist doesn't go away. It grows stronger. You were never fighting yourself. You were fighting the shadow. The part of you that remembers the truth you were never allowed to say. It feels like an internal war, but it's not really you. It's the version she created, the you engineered to keep her comfortable, protect her emotions, absorb her projections, fulfill her dreams, never ask for too much, and always put her first. But that version isn't you. It's a survival mechanism shaped by love and fear. Yet you still obey it. You hear your own needs and silence them. You feel your boundaries and push past. You know you're drained, but you keep going, believing your worth is measured by sacrifice. You inherited her guilt, her shame, her self-rejection, and now you carry it like it's your own. But it never was. This is the war inside you. The clash between who you really are and who you became to survive. It's why love feels dangerous, rest feels like laziness, and truth feels like betrayal. Because every time you try to be whole, you awaken the parts you hid away. The anger, the fear, the wildness, the real you screaming for recognition. But this awakening is also your freedom. The shadow, once embraced, stops controlling you. When you face those buried parts with compassion, you reclaim your power. You rewrite the old scripts and break free from survival mode. You begin to understand that being whole doesn't mean being perfect or safe. It means being real, even when it's messy and uncomfortable. It means loving all parts of yourself, even the ones you once rejected. So, stop running from your shadow. Stop fighting the voice inside that remembers your truth. It's not your enemy, it's your lost self trying to come home. When you embrace the shadow, you reclaim your wholeness. You become the person you were always meant to be, not the survival version, but the authentic you. And that is the bravest journey you can take. You become conscious of these patterns. They will continue to control your life. The persona, the mask you wear to survive, will keep running the show, while the real you remains hidden, unheard, and starved for acknowledgement. But awareness is the beginning of freedom. When you start to see the scripts you've been following, you begin to question them. You realize that the fears she instilled were not truths but echoes of her own pain. You learn that the silence you adopted was a shield, not your authentic voice. And slowly, painfully, you begin to reclaim what was lost. Healing isn't about erasing the past, or blaming your mother. It's about meeting the parts of yourself that were shaped in her shadow, gently holding them, and letting them breathe. It's about recognizing that the anger you suppressed is a call to protect your boundary. The sadness you hid is a signal that you deserve compassion. The fear you carry is a reminder that your inner child still needs safety. This journey requires courage. It means disappointing the survival version she built, not out of spite, but out of love for your true self. It means saying, I am not your reflection. I am my own person. I am worthy beyond approval. I am enough just as I am. You will stumble. You will face resistance from others and from within. The shadow will fight to stay hidden, whispering lies and doubts. But every time you choose honesty over hiding, you grow stronger. Every time you honor your need, you reclaim your power. This is restoration, not rebellion. You are not breaking away from your past. You are integrating. You are inviting the lost parts of yourself back home so you can live whole and free. Remember, the shadow is not your enemy. It is your guide. It is the part of you that never forgot who you were before you learned to disappear. It holds your fire, your clarity, your deepest truth. The moment you stop apologizing for coming back to yourself, healing truly begins. The moment you say, I am done fighting a war I never started, you step into your freedom. No matter how buried, how disguised, or how disconnected you feel, the real you is waiting for the day you finally show up fully, not as the child who survived, but as the adult who chooses herself. Your past may live in your fears, your patterns, your silences, but it does not have to define your future. You have the power to rewrite the story, to meet yourself with compassion, to live authentically, because the real victory is not in pleasing others or avoiding pain. It is in becoming whole, in embracing every fractured piece of yourself with kindness and courage. And that is the bravest journey you will ever take. The journey back to you is not mine. That voice demanding silence, it's not my truth. It's the ghost of a childhood script I never auditioned for. A story written by fear, not love. You realize that what you've been calling fate was really just inherited patterns playing on repeat. The restless heart, the anxious mind, the habit of shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. It's all programming, passed down without consent. But now, awareness flickers. You sense the possibility of choice, of breaking the cycle. You don't have to carry the weight of someone else's pain anymore. You don't have to prove your worth by sacrificing your needs. You don't have to numb your emotions to survive. This awakening is not a sudden explosion. It's a quiet unraveling, a gentle unthreading of the lies stitched into your soul. It's the slow, sometimes painful process of reclaiming the parts of you that were buried beneath survival. You start noticing the small moments, the hesitation before you speak your truth, the urge to apologize for simply existing, the way your body tightens at criticism or conflict. These are the echoes of programming, but they're not your final script. You learn to sit with discomfort without running, to say no without guilt, to ask for what you need without fear, to hold your boundaries firmly, lovingly, as a declaration of your value. The voices of shame and fear don't disappear overnight, but you stop letting them decide your worth. You recognize them as inherited noise, not your authentic self. Healing is messy and non-linear. There will be days when the old ghosts seem louder than ever, when you feel lost in shadows, doubting if freedom is possible. But every time you return to yourself, every time you refuse to obey the old commands, you reclaim your power. This isn't about becoming perfect or erasing the past. It's about embracing your humanity in all its complexity. The wounded and the wise, the fearful and the brave, the silent child, and the growing adult, all parts waiting to be known and loved. You begin to rewrite your story, not as a victim of fate or family, but as a conscious creator of your life. You learn that the most radical act of love is acceptance. Acceptance of your scars, your needs, your truth. And in that acceptance, you find freedom. Freedom from the scripts you never chose. Freedom to be seen, heard, and loved exactly as you are. Freedom to finally live as yourself, unprogrammed, unashamed, whole. Because the greatest healing comes not from fixing what was broken, but from remembering who you truly are beneath the noise. You were never too much. You were just carrying too many voices that weren't yours. And now, you are learning to speak your own. Aim is fading now. You feel it slipping. The old scripts, the rehearsed smiles, the silent agreements to stay small. It's unsettling. Yes, because for so long, that version of you was survival. But survival isn't living. Now, you're stepping into something raw and real. You're learning that saying no isn't rebellion. It's reclaiming your voice. Resting isn't weakness. It's honoring your needs. And being seen as you are, without filters or performances, is not rejection. It's authenticity. This process is not easy. It shakes the foundation of everything you thought you knew about yourself. It challenges the stories you told yourself to feel safe. It demands courage to face the discomfort of truth and the vulnerability of being fully alive. Carl Jung called this individuation the journey back to your true self, not the self shaped by fear obligation or invisible rules, but the self beneath it all, waiting patiently to be known. Healing doesn't come from fixing what's wrong, but from peeling back layers of conditioning. It's about recognizing that the guilt for resting, the urge to explain too much, the fear of being disliked, these were never yours to carry. They were downloaded, inherited, taught, and now, awareness awakens you to your own self-betrayal, not as failure but as freedom's first breath. Because to say no, to hold a boundary, to honor your needs, this is the quiet revolution happening inside you. Yes, freedom feels uncomfortable at first. Comfort was your cage. Breaking free means feeling naked, exposed, even alone. But this is not a sign of collapse. It is a sign of return. Return to the self who was hidden beneath obedience and silence. Most around you may still wear masks, still live their programming unaware, but you've chosen different. You've stopped pretending. This makes you dangerous not to others, but to the illusions that kept you trapped. Dangerous to the old systems built on silence and self-denial. Healing begins not with blame, but with fierce, clear awareness, and that awareness will burn. It will tempt you to retreat, to control, to numb, to forget, but you won't, because something deep inside you, broken but unbound, has started to speak. This time you're listening. You are not your inherited fears. You are not the roles you played to survive. You are not the guilt disguised as love. You are what remains when all programming fades away. And that person that true you has always been there, waiting to be free. You were never meant to be someone's second chance, or a placeholder for their silence. You were born whole, untouched, unwritten, conditioned to disappear, shaped to keep peace, forced into shadows. You are now reclaiming your light. This is your awakening, your courage to say no, your permission to rest, your refusal to hide. This is your path back to you, one brave step at a time. The voice in your head that's been keeping you small isn't yours, it's her fear. The guilt that tightens your chest isn't your conscience, it's her shame. The relentless drive for perfection isn't your discipline, it's her desperate need for control that was never met. You spent years molding yourself, trying to be enough. But enough for who? Enough for the image she created, the version of you she wished, enough to earn a love that was always conditioned. You were never hers to cry. You weren't meant to be a savior, or a shadow of someone else's hopes and fears. You are far more sacred than that. You are the part she couldn't touch, the core of you that remained untouched, despite every attempt to shape, mold or silence it. That original self never vanished. It simply waited for the noise to quiet, for awareness to rise, for you to stop running from your own reflection, and finally ask, what if I'm not broke? What if I'm just buried? Here's the truth. You were never too much. You weren't wrong. You were just surrounded by those who needed you to stay small, so they wouldn't have to face their own growth. Maybe she did the best she could. Maybe she carried wounds passed down to her, unseen and unhealed. Maybe she never saw you clearly because no one ever really saw her. But that cycle of silence, pain and expectation ends with you, not by blaming, but by becoming. Becoming the first in your lineage to refuse the weight of unspoken trauma disguised as love, to stop apologizing for simply existing, to stop shrinking for the sake of peace. When you rise, you don't just heal yourself, you heal everyone who came before you and everyone who will follow. You become the blueprint she never had, the living proof of transformation. In that moment, you return to the self you were always meant to be. You are what remains when the programming finally falls away. Not the obedient child, not the fixer, not the mirror reflecting others' needs, but the authentic you beneath it all. The you who never needed to be anything other than real. If no one has ever told you this before, hear it now. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to be loud. You are allowed to disappoint those who only loved your silence. You don't owe anyone your erasure. You were never hers to design. You were yours all along. If this message woke something inside you, something buried yet still alive, then you are exactly where you need to be. This channel is more than a place to watch. It's a place to remember who you really are beneath the layers, beyond the pain, beyond the program. So hit subscribe and keep walking the path back to yourself, because the journey is yours to take, and the self waiting for you is more beautiful than you ever imagined.